Wisconsin Eye's 2014 election coverage is brought to you by the Wisconsin Hospital Association. For over 90 years, a valued voice for Wisconsin hospitals, supporting high-quality, high-value care in communities like yours.
Wisconsin Eye coverage of the 2014 elections. We are on the campus of North Central Tech College in Wausau. We're interviewing State Representative Scott Krug of Nakusa. He's a Republican seeking re-election in the 72nd Assembly District. Scott, welcome back to Wisconsin Eye.
Thank you, Steve. It's good to be here.
Wisconsin Eye appreciates the support of the Wisconsin Hospital Association, which represents more than 139 hospitals and health systems, for making these candidate interviews possible. Scott, we were talking about, you consider environmental issues one of your top priorities. Can you talk about what's needed or what issues have emerged, sir?
Sure, yeah. You know, since redistricting, my district became very agricultural to the eastern side and very tourist related on the western side. So there's two, big industries in the state of Wisconsin that kind of come up against each other and looking for the right answers. The biggest problem the two are having with each other right now is water usage and making sure that each have enough water to draw tourists in and keep water clean for tourists to be happy with, and ag to have enough water to irrigate crops in the Central Sands, because that's about the only way you can grow food in the Central Sands area is irrigation. So we worked really hard this session on new high cap well legislation, making sure there's a balance between ag and tourism. They don't have to be exclusive. And that's something I spent about the last year and a half on, really trying to find that balance. And I think we've made a lot of good friends along the way. Farm Bureau's happy with where we're at. The League of Conservation Voters are happy with where we're at. There's more to do. We have a bill coming up next session that got to work out some details to protect private wells, from any new coming agriculture operations. Keeping phosphorus out of our lakes, keeping runoff to a minimum. All those things that we took a leadership spot on this time around. We're really looking forward to next session to pick up steam again. Speaker Voss has tasked us with the goal of trying to solve some of the bigger water problems in the state. So when we start in the Central Sands, it's just kind of a primer for where we're going to go in the rest of the state.
There was a recent law judge ruling on this issue. Was that a helpful or was that a setback?
There are two things that really happened. We saw, Lake Beulah decision a few years ago, obviously, and now the Administrative Law Court said you have to look at a cumulative impact approach. So it kind of codifies some of the things we talked about in Lake Beulah. So now DNR is going to be tasked with making sure that any new well that goes in, you have to look at the cumulative effect. Whether it's a groundwater issue or whether it's a surface water issue. If that well is causing some issues, DNR has the authority, and now according to the state judge, the mandate to do some of these cumulative impact assessments. And I think even in the Dairy Association and those folks, they understand that this is somewhat of a win also. Because now you have set limits that they can actually plan for their operations and make sure that they're going to be able to put in new operations where they need to when it comes to the time. So I think it's a win-win. I think it's going to lead to a lot of compromise in the next session to try to find an answer that will balance everybody's needs. And it put both groups in a position to have to compromise. I think the environmental groups don't want to lose that decision through legislation. And I think the dairy folks also want to come back a little bit from that decision and say, does it have to apply to everybody? So there's a great groundswell of compromise coming for that next session.
Okay, let's talk about issues that if you're reelected you're going to be dealing with next session. Excuse me. One of the big ones, of course, is aid to schools.
Oh, sure.
What's going to be your priorities when school aid's debated next session?
Yeah, school aid, the biggest thing that I took away from this last session for school aid is that we had the Rural Schools Task Force. And, coming from where I come from in the 72nd, I have many school districts that are basically one building districts. So, the rural school, approach and trying to find money for transportation and trying to look for sparsity aid things and, trying to relieve mandates from those schools that can give them more flexibility are the things those administrators are talking about. We've been able to put some money back into education this last budget. I think the money will be there for us to do that again next time. But my focus is going to be absolutely on the rural side of the equation. Whether it comes down to fixing the funding formula for rural schools or whether it comes to just increasing some categorical aids for them. They're in a tight spot, so we have to really focus on their efforts first.
Part of that debate is going to be the future of vouchers and choice. The Speaker, of course, wants to remove the 1,000 cap on outstate slots. Do you support the Speaker on that?
That's something I'm going to have to think about a little bit more. On one hand, I'm a huge advocate for school choice and want to make sure that every parent has the opportunity to find the best educational opportunities for their kids. As the chairman of Children and Families, I think that's a great idea. I think every child should have the opportunity to go to school where they want. But on the other hand, it does have an effect on rural schools. And that's something, like I said, we have to try to find a mechanism. And if we have those dollars in the general fund to make sure it doesn't harm rural schools, then I'm absolutely all for it.
The governor over the summer called for Wisconsin to withdraw from the Common Core standards. Your position?
I think the biggest thing with Common Core is if we're going to have Common Core standards, I think they should at least be Wisconsin standards. Letting the federal government come in and tell us what their idea is for Wisconsin kids isn't exactly my favorite idea. So I think at the very minimum, we have to look at Wisconsin standards, get back to an approach where the public feel included in the process as opposed to one person making the decision for the entire state. Tony Evers accepted the ideal of Common Core. I think it was something that kind of set people off to the fact that, hey, we should have some discussions about this. We should be open about the process. And that's what everybody on the other side of the aisle asks us about everything else, is be open to the process, let the sun shine on everything. And I think we need to do that with Common Core, too. I've heard some good things about Common Core. There's some things in there that I appreciate. When we look at standards, I think we should have standards for kids for school in Wisconsin, so we know that when they graduate high school, they're at a certain proficiency, so they can go to college, or they can thrive here at North Central Tech or Mid-State Tech or whichever school they go to. But on the other hand, it should be Wisconsin-driven.
Transportation funding. You've heard the projections. We may be $600 million, $700 short in the next biennium. How do we fill that hole?
That's a great question. That's going to be the question in the next state budget, is figuring out where exactly that hole gets filled in. And I think the biggest thing that I take away from that is that with every budget, when we set a standard for spending in the budget, it doesn't mean that you have to reach that spending limit. The governor doesn't have to go to that level and spend all of those dollars. So we can be more efficient. We can find ways to make cuts or make targeted decisions or prioritize projects. We can find ways to make the gas tax actually apply to the things that it's meant for. Some of the things that are funded by gas tax just shouldn't be right now. So I think when it comes down to those things, those are our first steps. We solved the $3.6 billion overall budget deficit once before. To look at a smaller chunk for transportation, I think will be an easier thing to bite off, but not an incredibly easy feat to start. One of the big things that will help people get more comfortable with where we go with that is the referendum, the constitutional question.
It's on the ballot November 4th.
Yeah, it'll be on the ballot, so they'll have a chance to be more familiar with what transportation funding is. They'll know exactly when those dollars come in, they have to be used for those projects. I think that might make more people more comfortable to maybe possible revenue increases down the road if they know those dollars are dedicated.
Would you consider raising the gas tax or the $75 that you and I pay to register?
I've considered both. I've looked at both of them. I don't know if the gas tax is the first one I would look at. The registration one makes a little bit more sense, but I'm not quite there yet to say, yeah, we could go ahead and raise that. It was just a few years ago, honestly, that it was raised. I mean, that's something that people might take some pretty big offense to, is jumping up that quick again. So maybe if we can phase something into that, but my first goal would be to look for ways to be more efficient and to cut some of the expenditures.
Health care funding. 1 in 5 Wisconsin residents get their health care through our Medicaid program. Yeah. The American Hospital Association says our reimbursement rates for MA are the second lowest.
Yes,
should they be increased?
I think they should, and it's something that we really looked at in the state budget, is trying to fill those gaps too. But when you start talking all these things in the state budget, thinking that it should be refilled or it should be improved or should be added more money to, you start adding dollars really quickly. So I mean, this is one area that we have to prioritize. If you prioritize education and health care, we'll find ways to take care of transportation and those other things later down the road, corrections and university issues. I think those are the things that really bring in leadership into the question. And when we're down in Madison making those really tough choices, which ones do we attack first? That's something that's left out of the equation from the other side, I think, sometimes, is they want to attack everything all together. We have to find ways to make sure that the taxpayers are protected, make sure that their services are funded that they want, and to give them a voice in this. So I think the two things that they really are interested in funding are obviously education, health care, transportation coming in close third.
Frac sand mining is an issue in central and western Wisconsin. It seems to be a debate in the Capitol between those who say it's strictly a local control issue and others who say the state should set minimal standards and local governments couldn't go beyond that. Your feeling?
Yeah, it's for 4 years, I never went into the realm of politics to be a mining kind of guy, but my first 2 years were about frac sand. We talked a lot about county roles in frac sand oversight and what the state should do. I've pushed really hard for the last few years to make sure the state stays out of the equation, lets the counties do the appropriate things, and if counties tend to start overstepping their bounds, then maybe it's time for the state to look at it. We funded some more positions for frac sand monitoring for water quality and air quality, so the DNR can get out and have employees make sure that the right things are being done. But I think in the long run, Wood County, for example, has done a great job in trying to come up with road agreements, operational agreements, making sure they work with their frac sand companies, and making sure the industry can thrive. So I didn't see any reason the state should get involved this last session.
On your campaign website, you say a big win for your district was keeping Skyward here, and now they're going to open a new world headquarters. So keeping 300 jobs plus an additional 700 jobs?
That's the exciting thing, is Skyward could be up to 1,000 jobs very soon in central Wisconsin with a campus that would rival Google at some point. And those jobs are, those are 50,000 a year jobs for customer service. Those are things that are game changers for regions. And I was very happy to work with folks from both sides of the aisle, Joint Finance, the Speaker's office, the governor, to try to make sure that we can keep a good Wisconsin company having the option to work in Wisconsin. Nobody guarantees them anything. We didn't give them a monopoly or anything. They have to compete. And they have a great product, and they're well liked in the area, and the school districts love them. It's the crown jewel of this last session, I think.
What did DPI do wrong on that deal, Scott?
I think there was some efforts from some people who had previously worked for Infinite Campus during the procurement process, and it just kind of got infiltrated a little bit too far into DPI, and it made it stink a little bit too much for me to sit back and say, okay, this is okay. Going back and looking at some of those procurement problems and seeing, the overall picture, stepping back and saying, why are we creating a monopoly in the first place? Those are things that, sometimes you make those votes and you go back and think, okay, what happened? And, the typical response is, well, okay, we already did it, we're not going to go back and fix it. But sometimes you do have to go back and fix it, and that's what we did with Skyward, is say, hey, this process stunk. We got to be honest about what we're doing here. We got to give them a chance to compete.
The bill to legalize medical marijuana will be coming back.
Yes.
States of Washington and Colorado have legalized recreational marijuana. Your positions on both questions?
I'm really proud of the fact that I worked with the Representative Call from Madison to pass the first medical marijuana bill in the state of Wisconsin, the CBD oil bill.
Yes.
That'll make a big difference for a lot of families.
Are you frustrated that nobody has used it yet?
I am.
It's never been prescribed?
We worked really well with the hospital and the medical societies and those folks to say, hey, get on board with this. We're happy to take your advice on this bill. They gave us some advice. And doctors have been a little hesitant so far. But I think with anything else that's new, it takes a little while to get the kinks worked out, to get the first guy to step into the process. And we're still going to work with the doctors and the hospitals to say, hey, the FDA investigational permits are not that hard to get if you try, if you make the effort. You see family after family moving to other states. And that's just what I don't want. As the chairman of Children and Families, my main goal is to make sure that families stay intact and that they stay here and they have opportunities.
What about taking the next step?
And that's something we have to have a discussion on. I don't think my caucus or myself may necessarily be there completely for the full medical marijuana bill.
Okay.
But that's what I do, is I look for those areas that we can come together and find that common ground. This, I think, was that first common ground step. As far as overall recreational use, I've worked in enough criminal justice programs to know that recreational use of marijuana is not a good idea. It's not something we should open up for the public at this time.
And it's an old issue, but it comes up every year. First offense drunken driving. Should it be a crime?
Yeah, touching back on some of the things I've done in criminal justice and, recidivism programs, I would love to see more of an intervention ahead of time before incarceration. I don't want to see us creating new criminal laws and putting people back into the process where once you get a conviction for a misdemeanor or felony, it gets harder to have a job. When it gets harder to have a job, it's harder to support your family. When it's hard to support your family's split up. So I think we can create a common ground in between there where we can create a good program for first offense drunk drivers to complete driving assessments, alcohol assessments, find out if there is an actual problem with their alcohol abuse, if there is any, and try to help them fix that problem before we start turning them into criminals.
3 weeks ago, the governor said if he's reelected, he would like to drug test people who are getting food stamps and jobless benefits. Your feeling?
I worked for 2 years in the Food Shared Employment and Training Program at the Green Bay Job Center. And I can tell you firsthand that there are a good amount of folks who come into the system that you have those thoughts about, and you have those ideas that maybe we should find out if they're able to even go to work before we start giving them that benefit. Something we talked about 4 years ago was passing that bill. We had some reservations in the caucus. I support the idea. I think if I have to, in the private sector, go work at any factory or any corporate office and open to random drug testing, I think everybody should be able to have that idea in their head that you have to keep clean so you can get on the right path. And
the governor also said he wants to freeze tuition not only in the UW campuses but on the tech college campuses. Freeze on the tech college campus is a good idea?
That I have to look at more. I mean, there's a lot of pressures on the tech schools right now. I mean, that's something that I've always taken to heart. I graduated from Mid-State Tech in Wisconsin Rapids in police science, so I know exactly some of the struggles they're going through and have more firsthand knowledge, I think. It sounds like a good thing on the face, but it's something that's got to be looked at more. I don't want to put too much pressure on those incubators of firsthand knowledge to get people out to the jobs really quickly. So if it works out number-wise, absolutely. I think, like I mentioned with children and families, you got to have those dollars to be able to send your kids to school. You got to have those dollars after you send the kids to school to have recreational opportunities to create a tourism economy or to start a business. I mean, so you have to have those dollars freed up at some point. And if you're spending them all in one area, it's hard to spend them in any other area.
Do you want to highlight any differences between you and your opponent on November 4? And when I asked the same question of your opponent, he did bring up, he said you broke your pledge on collecting per diem. Do you want to respond to that one?
Absolutely. The per diem pledge I made in my first session. I said I won't ever this session take a per diem payment. I didn't.
Okay.
I left all those dollars on the table, and that's something I'm very proud of, is that I spent the time in Madison that it took to get the job done. This session, I wanted to spend even more time in Madison to get even more done. And if you look at my session accomplishments this session, I couldn't be prouder of what I've accomplished.
Okay.
As far as comparing myself and my opponent, I think that's something I'll let him do with the people. I think the bigger overriding factor, though, is there seems to be an ingrown pessimism in some of the candidates that are running against the majority members this session, is that we're on the decline, nothing's good enough, nothing's ever going to happen. But if you look at central Wisconsin, we have jobs coming, we have more trucks, we have more trains, we have more traffic. That tells me the economy's growing. Now hiring signs are popping up, we're seeing infrastructure projects. There's no reason to have any pessimism about central Wisconsin right now.
Thank you. State Representative Scott Krug of Nakusa is a Republican seeking re-election in the 72nd Assembly District. Scott, thanks for talking to Wisconsin Eye.
Absolutely, Steve. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.